There is a moment in every love story when the ground shifts beneath your feet. Not the moment you fall in love, not the moment you realize it, but the moment you discovered that everything you believed was built on something you were never told. She had not planned to overhear. She had simply come to collect herbs before the heat of the day made the walk unbearable. Her basket was half full. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking of the way he argued with her about goat training as though it was the most important debate in the world. The way he looked at her, like she was the most interesting person he had ever encountered. Two of his men, soldiers dressed as common travelers, spoke freely, not knowing she stood just beyond the tree line. One said, low and cautious, that the prince had lingered too long in this village, that the king was growing impatient. The other replied, nervous and urgent, that he knew, but he refused to leave, not without her. The prince, not a traveler, not a wanderer seeking silence from the noise of the world, a prince. Ama Dakoa stood very still among the trees, her basket forgotten at her feet, and felt something inside her chest crack, like dry earth in the season with no rain. She had trusted him. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she had trusted someone completely. And so, we must go back to understand why this crack felt like a distraction rather than mere disappointment. To understand why Ama Dakoa of the village of Adum had walls so high that even a prince could not simply walk through them. We must go back to the beginning, to a stream, to a basket of herbs, to a stranger with storm cloud eyes who told her she was the most interesting argument he had ever lost. We must go back 3 dry seasons. The village of Adum sits in the hills of Denkyira, like something the rest of the world forgot. Ancient and quiet and proud. The kind of village where drums speak in tongues older than memory, where grandmothers know the name of every plant on the hillside, where the children grow up believing that the land itself is listening. Ama Dakoa had grown up here. All her life, all her love, all her loss, Adum held it. Her mother had been the village's most gifted healer, hands that knew suffering the way a musician knows an instrument. She had taught Ama Dakoa everything: which root eases fever, which bark slows bleeding, which herb crushed between the fingers and inhaled brings a person back from the edge of grief. But before her mother had been a healer in Adum, she had been the wife of Kweku Dakoa, a good man, a quiet man, a man who served the kingdom of Denkyira with loyalty so complete, it never occurred to him that loyalty alone cannot protect you from those who have already decided your guilt. When Ama Dakoa was 4 years old, her father was accused of conspiring against the throne. The evidence was convincing, the trial was swift, the verdict was final. And the truth that Kweku Dakoa had been deliberately framed by men who needed a name to attach to their own crimes, the truth came too late. Her mother fled with her to Adum, carrying nothing but her healer's knowledge and a daughter too young to understand why people looked at them the way they did. Ama Dakoa grew up knowing her father's name as a wound, the traitor's daughter, never spoken aloud in her presence, but always present, in the careful distance people kept, in the way conversations shifted when she entered a space. Her mother had survived by making herself useful and invisible. And then Yo Dakoa arrived. He was a man who moved through the world like he was owed something by it. Charming when he needed to be, cold when he didn't. His hands bore old scars he never explained, and his eyes held secrets that made even the bravest villagers look away. He arrived in Adum with a new name, and a story that didn't quite hold together if you pulled at it. But he was persuasive. Generous with money, nobody asked him to explain. And Amadakoa's mother had been carrying too much alone for too many years. Amadakoa was 8 years old when Yodako moved in. By the time she was 12, she had learned to read the shift in his eyes. That meant the pleasant version of him had left the room. By the time she was 16, she had learned that charm is often just cruelty wearing better clothes. And so, Amadakoa built walls, not out of bitterness, out of wisdom and the hard way. She loved her village fiercely, she healed the sick with her mother's knowledge, she laughed easily with children and elders. But men who arrived with smooth words and easy smiles, those she did not trust. On the other side of the kingdom, in the great palace of Denkyira, a prince was suffocating. Prince Kofi Ansa was the lion of Denkyira, powerfully built, sharp and disciplined, carved from duty and intelligence. He had led armies before his 25th year, defeated invaders at the northern border, sat through 1,000 council meetings without once losing his composure. He was, by every measure, exactly what a crown prince should be, and he was desperately, quietly, completely exhausted by it. It was not the responsibility that wore him down. He did not resent duty. It was the loneliness that comes from being seen as a symbol rather than a man. Every person in that palace looked at him and saw the future king. Every conversation was careful, every laugh was calibrated. Even Abenasika of the neighboring kingdom, whose smile held secrets and whose eyes performed with warmth without ever quite feeling it, she looked at him and saw a throne. And so one dry season, Prince Kofi Ansa disguised himself as a common traveler and rode into the hills of Adum. He was looking for silence, and he found Amadakoa instead. He was leaning over the stream, cupping water in his hands when she appeared. She stood barefoot in a faded wrap of ochre and deep teal, her locks falling loose around her shoulders, small gold adinkra beads catching the afternoon light. She held a basket of medicinal herbs in one hand and a walking stick in the other that looked far more like a weapon than a support. Her gaze was the gaze of a hunter, measuring, unimpressed. She told him to move, that he was disturbing the water. No greeting, no softness, just the flat certainty of a woman who had long ago decided that strangers really deserved more. Kofi Ansa rose slowly. Brushing the dust from his knees, he carried, without meaning to, the unconscious authority of someone who had never once been spoken to that way in his life. He told her carefully that he was not there to rob her water. She looked at him the way you look at something you have already categorized, told him plainly that he was dressed too clean for a traveler and too proud to ask permission. And then, without another glance, she turned her back on him and walked away. No one had ever walked away from Prince Kofi Ansa of Denkyira. He stood beside the stream for a long moment, water dripping from his fingers, watching the place where she had disappeared into the trees. And then, against every reasonable instinct he possessed, he followed. Amadakoa was not cruel, but she was careful. And this stranger, with his clean clothes and his careful voice, and his eyes that held the depth of storm cloud, arrived looking exactly like every smooth-worded, polished-faced man she had spent her life learning not to trust. When Kofi Ansa tried to strike up a conversation, she walked away without a word. When he tried to help her carry firewood, she refused with a look that could have melted iron. When he complimented her cooking, which was perfect and they both knew it, she told him flatly it lacked salt. Most men would have left, insulted, defeated. Kofi Ansa came back the next day. He could not have explained why, not clearly. He had encountered resistance before, on battlefields, in council chambers, in the careful political dance of his father's court. But resistance there was always about power, about position, about what he represented. Amadakoa's resistance was different. She was not resisting the prince. She didn't even know there was a prince. She was resisting him, the actual man, the actual person standing in front of her and finding him wanting. He found he desperately wanted to change her mind. The village of Adum began to whisper. Who was this traveler who kept returning? Why did he help the elder men repair the grain store without being asked? Why did he see to the children and answer their questions about the capital as though their curiosity deserved real answers? And why did he always end up in an argument with Amadakoa that somehow managed to leave them both laughing? It started with glances that lingered a heartbeat too long. Then came moments when she forgot to frown when he approached. Then came the afternoon when he asked about her mother, and she told him, really told him, and watched his face hold the story carefully, the way you hold something fragile. No performance, no political calculation, just listening. But Amadakoa's walls had not been built in a day, and Dako, watching from the edges of the village, had begun to notice the stranger too. His scarred hands tightened around his palm wine cup. His old careful eyes measured this traveler, the way a man measures a threat. Dako had survived 15 years by being invisible, by being ordinary. A stranger asking questions was not ordinary. The breakthrough came on a day when grief stripped away all of Amadakoa's carefully constructed defenses. Her mother had fallen desperately ill. The fever came quickly, the way the worst things always do. The village healer had exhausted his knowledge. The herbs Amadakoa knew she had already tried. She sat beside her mother's mat through the night, holding her hand, whispering the name of plants as though the right combination of words might somehow be enough. And Dako, the man who had eaten at the table for 15 years, refused to spend a single coin on medicine from the distant market. He said it plainly, dismissive and final, that they could not afford what they did not have. Amadakoa knew what he spent on palm wine. She knew what he spent at the gambling fires. She said nothing, because she had learned long ago that saying something to Dako only ever made things worse. Kofi Ansah found her beneath the ancient Odum tree, crying quietly, the way people cry when they have long since learned not to ask for help. He said nothing. He simply looked at her face, read what was there, and disappeared into the gathering dusk. By the time the moon rose, he returned. He had driven to the capital and back, and brought with him a healer of rare skill, and pouches of medicine that cost more than the families earned in a full season. He said nothing about what it cost. He asked nothing in return. The healer walked through the night, and gradually the fever loosened its grip. Amadakoa did not say thank you. Her pride was not ready for that, and somehow he seemed to understand. But the next morning, before the rest of the village had stirred, she left a bowl of warm porridge outside his guest hut. Porridge sweetened with honey, spiced with cinnamon, prepared with her own hands, and in the dark before dawn. It was their first truce, fragile as pan glass, but real as the sunrise. In the days that followed, Kofi Ansah and Amadakoa discovered something neither had expected. They could make each other laugh. Her wit was sharp enough to cut, and his was quick enough to parry. They argued about everything, the best way to weave baskets, whether the rains will come early, the proper method for training goats, and their arguments had lost their edge entirely. They had become a kind of verbal dance, the kind that leaves you energized and strangely content and thinking about the next round long after you have gone home. Something was happening between them. Amadakoa felt it, the way you feel a change in weather, not seeing it yet, but knowing in your bones that something is shifting. She was afraid of it. She was also, for the first time in longer than she could remember, not afraid of the parser causing it. But Yo Dako was watching, and in the capital city of Denkyira, a woman with cold eyes and a patient calculating smile had sent her shadows into the hills. Abena Sika did not leave loose threads unexamined. The morning Amadakwa overheard the soldiers, she did not go home immediately. She stood among the trees until her heartbeat slowed from something wild to something merely painful. Then she picked up her basket, walked back through the village, laid her herbs out to dry with steady hands and a face that showed nothing. She was very good at that, showing nothing. Life had taught her that too, though not kindly. When Kofi Ansah came to find her that afternoon, easy and smiling, carrying a mango he had bought from the market woman because he had noticed 3 weeks ago that she had always stopped at that stall, though never bought anything. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she asked him, very quietly, to tell her who he really was. The truth. All of it. He went still, the way a man goes still when the thing he had been dreading finally arrives. He set the mango down. He did not look away from her face, and he told her everything. He told her his name was Kofi Ansah, Prince of Denkyira, that he had come to Adam wearing a traveler's clothes because he was suffocating inside a palace full of people who saw him as a symbol instead of a man, that he had never intended to deceive her, that he had only wanted to find one place, one person who might speak to him honestly, and that he had found far more than he was looking for. The silence that followed had weight. Amadakwa looked at him the way she looked at everything that had ever disappointed her, with eyes that did not flinch. She told him precisely what she thought of a man who sat at their fire, ate their food, and let her trust him while knowing every single day exactly who he was and exactly what that meant. While she had been seeing, he had been hiding. He could not argue with that. He did not try. He told her simply, with the weight of absolute honesty, that she was right, that he had no defense except the truth, that what he had found here was more real than anything he had ever felt in years, that he had been afraid that if she knew who he was, she would stop seeing him and start seeing a prince, and that he had not been ready to lose the only honest conversations he ever had. Amadakwa stood up, picked up her walking stick, and walked away. 3 days of silence followed. Kofi Ansah remained in the village. He did not try to speak to her. He helped her where he could, repairing a roof, fetched water for the elder woman at the end of the road, sitting with the children while he kept one eye, always on the door of the house she never came out of. But those 3 days, Kofi Ansah did not spend only waiting. He sent word quietly to the capital, to the royal archives, to the oldest living council members who had served during his grandfather's reign. He asked them to find everything that existed about a man named Kweku Dakoa, not because he needed leverage, but because he had listened, really listened, and he had heard, underneath every wall she had ever built, the name of a father she had never been allowed to mourn with dignity. On that morning, she came to him. She did not apologize. He did not ask her to. She sat beside him in silence for a long moment, and then she said, as though it was the most ordinary observation in the world, that the gods in the Eastfield needed moving before the dry season ended, that if he was still here, he could help. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door left slightly open, and Kofi Ansah, who had conquered armies and survived 1,000 calculated royal smiles, felt more victorious in that moment than he had ever had in his life. What neither of them knew was that the world beyond Adum had already begun to move against them. Abenasika's shadows returned to the capital carrying 2 pieces of information. The first, that Prince Kofi Ansah's heart had been given to a village girl in the hills. The second, far more dangerous, that the girl's stepfather, Yo Dako of Adum, was not who he claimed to be. He was Yo Wakosi, the former royal advisor who had attempted a bloody rebellion against the throne 15 years earlier. He had been officially executed, but in the chaos of the aftermath, he had walked away from his own death and built a new life in the last place anyone would think to look. a quiet village in the Forgotten Hills. The man Amadako had called her stepfather for 15 years had once tried to bathe the palace in royal blood. Abenasika smiled when this report was placed in her hands. She had waited patiently, she had watched carefully, and now the prince had handed her exactly what she needed. She brought her evidence before the royal council with careful performance of a loyal subject carrying a heavy heart. She told the council gravely that their beloved prince had been bewitched by the daughter of a traitor who had once sought to destroy the very throne, that this village girl had deliberately ensnared him, that the blood of Kweku Dakwa ran through her veins and could not be trusted. The chamber erupted. When Prince Kofi Ansa was summoned to face the accusations, he entered the chaos of that room carrying something none of them had expected: calm. He did not deny his visits to Adum. He did not deny his feelings. He stood before the council and let his voice cut through the noise like a blade finding its mark. He told them she was no witch, that neither was she theirs to slander, that if loving an honest woman was a crime, then he stood guilty, but that they should not insult his intelligence by pretending that politics disguised as love served the kingdom better than love disguised as nothing at all. The silence that followed was the silence of a room watching history being made or unmade. Nobody was certain which. The great festival of the harvest moon was the most sacred celebration in Denkyira's calendar. The palace courtyards blazed with bonfires, rams beat rhythms that echoed the heartbeat of the earth itself, the air vibrated with joy and incense and the smell of food prepared since morning. It was also the perfect cover for treason. In the shadow of celebration, Yo Dako and Abenasika had woven a conspiracy years in the making, poisoned the king during the ceremonial toast, and blamed the death on his son's alliance with a traitor's daughter, used the chaos to seize power. What they did not know was that Kofi Ansa had been watching them for weeks, not from the palace, not through his soldiers, through Amadakoa. When Amadakoa learned the truth about her stepfather, not from Kofi Ansa, but from the village elder who had recognized Yodako's face in an old wanted scroll from the capital, she did not run away from it. She did not protect him. She sat with the horror of it for one long silent night, and then she chose. She chose justice. Working quietly and carefully, she turned Yodako's own network of village allies against him. She revealed the truth about his past to those who had unknowingly helped him. One by one, they came to her with pieces of the conspiracy she carried back to Kofi Ansa. It cost her something. Yodako was not her blood, but he was the only father figure she had ever known, and choosing to dismantle him was the loneliest thing she had ever done. The ceremony reached its peak as Ohenekwame raised the ceremonial cup. The crowd fell silent. The poisoned wine glittered like liquid gold in the firelight, and death waited in the crystal depths. As the king lifted his cup towards his lips, Kofi Ansa stepped forward. His voice carried across the sudden absolute hush that before his father drank, he wished to offer him a gift more precious than wine, the gift of truth. What followed stunned the assembled multitudes. With documents, with witnesses, with every piece of evidence Amadakoa had helped him gather, Kofi Ansa dismantled the conspiracy piece by piece in front of the entire kingdom. Abenasika's face went white as bone. Yodako's allies melted away into the crowd. But Yodako, cornered and furious, with nothing left to lose, drew a hidden blade. He lunged at the king, and Kofi Ansa threw himself into the path of that desperate attack. Steel rang again, still in the firelight. A blade meant for the king opened a line of fire across Kofi Ansa's ribs. He went to one knee. He did not stay there. The people of Denkyira saw their prince's courage and responded with a kind of loyalty that needs no royal decree. Common farmers, merchants, mothers with their children still on their backs, they surrounded the conspirators until the palace guards could restore order. And then Nana Efwa, the queen mother, stepped forward. Her voice rang across the courtyard like thunder rolling down from the mountains. She declared that the son she had raised had chosen truth over comfort, justice over safety, his people over his pride, that he had proven himself worthy not just of a crown, but the love and loyalty of every soul in the kingdom. The judgment was swift. Yodako and Abenasika were stripped of all titles, all property, all claim to citizenship. Exiled that same night, cast beyond the kingdom's borders with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Amadakwa watched Yodako leave. She did not cry. She had made her choice and she stood inside it. But her hands were shaky. Kofi Ansa's recovery was slow. And before Amadakwa would agree to sit with him, before she would consider what stood between them and what might still be possible, he asked her to come to the council chamber. She came, reluctantly, her chin raised the way it always was when she was preparing for disappointment. The council was assembled. Ohenekwame sat at its head, and Kofi Ansa, still bearing the marks of his wound, stood before them and presented what his messengers had spent 3 weeks gathering: the original evidence from his grandfather's reign, testimonies from men now old who had been silenced years ago, documents that had been buried beneath the 15 years of deliberate forgetting, the proof that Kweku Dakoa had been innocent, framed by the very men whose rebellion he had tried to expose. Before the full council, before the same institution that had condemned him, Ohenekwame declared the name of Kweku Dakoa officially and permanently restored, the traitor's name removed from the records, the loyal man's name returned to its rightful owner. Amadakwa stood very still. She had spent her entire life carrying a name that the world had decided was a wound. And in that room, on that morning, it was simply her father's name again, clean, restored, and hers. She did not look at Kofi Ansa immediately. When she finally did, her eyes held something he had never seen in them before. Not the careful measuring gaze of a woman deciding whether to trust, not the guarded stillness of someone waiting for the next disappointment. Something open, something that had been behind every wall she had ever built, finally with nowhere left to hide. His recovery was slow, and Amadakwa never left his side. She fed him broths made from herbs she collected herself early each morning before the rest of the palace woke. She told him stories of her childhood in Adum, the funny ones, the painful ones, the ones she had never told anyone. She scolded him relentlessly for throwing himself at armed men as though courage was the same thing as armor. She told him one afternoon, fierce and tender in the same breath, that he was a magnificent fool. That did he have any idea how close he had come to leaving her a widow before she had even agreed to be a wife? He smiled, the first real smile since the night of the festival. He caught her hand gently and asked if that was a proposal. She looked at him, this prince who had disguised himself as ordinary and accidentally become the most extraordinary person in her life. She told him it was a statement of fact, that she had spent too much effort keeping him alive to let some other woman benefit from her work. Their love had not been gentle courtship or sweet poetry. It had been fire and sun and storm, forged in conflict and tempered by truth. But it was real, in a way neither of them had ever dared to hope. They married under the ancient Odom tree in the palace courtyard, the symbol of endurance and persistence of life through every dry season. There was no cloth of gold, but there were drums that spoke in the old language, songs that had been sung at weddings since the kingdom's founding, and the people of Denkyira filled the courtyard and spilled into the streets, cheering for the prince who had chosen truth over convenience, and the village girl who had chosen courage over comfort. Together, King Kofi Ansa and Queen Amadakwa ruled Denkyira with wisdom earned through struggle and compassion learned through loss. Their palace doors remained open to any citizen with a grievance or a dream. Amadakwa never forgot where she came from. She brought healers from Adum to the capital. She built a school on the hill where the children of farmers and merchants learned beside the children of advisors and generals. And above the school entrance, she placed a carved stone inscription, the restored name of Kweku Dakoa, so that every child who passed beneath it will know that truth, however long it is buried, will always find its way back to the surface. And when the chronicles of future generations looked back on their reign, they will write of the king and queen who proved that the greatest strength comes not from never falling, but from choosing every single day to help each other rise. A prince who disguised himself as ordinary discovered that love is the only crown that cannot be inherited. It must be earned.